Breaking news today. Putin's time in Ukraine is coming to an end. Russian President Vladimir Putin and his generals are trying to manage a stalled, if not failed, winter offensive in the Donbass that has resulted in the deaths of as many as 75,000 Russian soldiers and Wagner Group mercenaries as the Ukrainian spring turns bloodily into summer. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and his generals are getting closer to Kyiv's much-anticipated counteroffensive, and as the Kremlin's overall casualties continue to mount, upwards of 200,000 according to the United Kingdom's Ministry of Defense, it is becoming increasingly clear that we are likely seeing the beginning of the end of Putin in Ukraine. Ukraine is about the size of Texas. The counterattack from Kyiv could originate from any number of directions. With so much territory to cover, Russian General Valery Vasilyevich Gerasimov has a mission comparable to that of German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel in World War II, when he was tasked with protecting Nazi-occupied France and Norway from an Allied invasion. Putin's special military operation is likely to have the same ultimate outcome as Normandy and Operation Overlord in the summer and fall of 1944. The next question is where and how Gerasimov positions his defense forces: the Donbass, the Crimea, or somewhere else entirely. Also related to this mystery is whether or not Russian forces will put up a fight, surrender, or simply return home to Russia. The Russian armed forces have not shown any signs of being good at defending their territory. Battles fought in the Kherson Oblast last fall may be indicative of future Russian defensive performance on the battlefield and have an impact on the timing and location of Ukrainian offensive operations. At least publicly, the Kremlin seems to be suggesting they anticipate a Ukrainian counterattack in Crimea. Planet Labs and Maxar Technologies' commercial satellite imagery shows a massive network of trenches and other defensive structures being rapidly constructed in the Perekop Isthmus. Russia is fortifying the strategically important narrow land bridge between Crimea and the interior of Ukraine. These fortifications are being hurriedly built along the beachfront and incorporate natural obstacles to thwart amphibious invasions. If Crimea is where a modern-day D-Day is launched, it would be the latest in a long line of similar battles fought on the same land, dating back to Roman times and culminating in 1941, when the German army invaded Soviet-held Crimea. Kyiv can learn a lot from the Soviet strategy of defense in depth, with an emphasis on maintaining Sevastopol and Kerch to sustain their forces, after they lost that battle and then retook the peninsula in 1944. Russian defenses focus on reducing movement speeds, bottlenecking and channeling armored formations into kill zones, and then annihilating the targets with both direct and indirect fire. Images show Moscow's planned defensive measures, which include trenches, tank traps, ditches, and dragon's teeth barriers. The use of BTM-3s, a trenching machine developed in the Soviet Union that can dig straight, zigzag, or curved trenches, has hastened the process. With a width of about 2 feet at the bottom of the trench, the BTM-3 is able to dig 312-foot deep basic trenches or 5-foot deep full-size trenches. These countermeasures are representative of the Russian military doctrine as a whole: set up immovable objects as targets and smash them with artillery. The defense of the Crimean Peninsula is strategically important to Russian national security because maintaining control of the peninsula means maintaining influence over the Black Sea region in the event of a Ukrainian counteroffensive. Such was the concern. The Kremlin shot down a U.S. surveillance drone flying off the coast of the peninsula and declared a red line against any invasion of the area. Former U.S. Army Europe commander and retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges agrees. Hodges is absolutely correct that the liberation of Crimea is crucial to a successful outcome for Ukraine and is, thus, decisive. As evidence, look no further than Russia's elaborate ongoing defensive preparations at the Kremlin. However, the Russians are experiencing difficulties. Neither Chief of Staff General Valery Zaluzhny nor Ukrainian Ground Forces Commander Colonel General Alexander Syrsky will let Moscow's fortifications in Crimea snare Kyiv's assault. Putin's defensive fortifications are static, susceptible to interdiction of supply lines, and can be bypassed, much like the French Maginot Line of World War I if Ukraine decides to destroy the Kerch Bridge and block access to the Black Sea ports of Yalta, Feodosia, Kerch, Sevastopol, Kornomorsky, and Yevpatoria, the peninsula will effectively become an island and be subject to a siege. If that's the case, winning will depend on who you ask. Putin, the Kremlin, and his pro-war millbloggers might have that, but the mobilized soldier or conscript on the ground who's been ordered to hold at all costs probably doesn't. It is expected that the Ukrainian counteroffensive will launch in the Donbass, where Russia is militarily weakest, and will culminate in a crushing defeat of the Russian army and the likely collapse of Putin's regime in southern Crimea. As Hodges makes abundantly clear, Ukraine must methodically and incrementally make the Crimean Peninsula untenable, by launching precision deep strikes on key military facilities, military headquarters, and the Kerch Bridge, the primary military supply chain lifeline back to Russia.